The majority of people say they want to read more books, but that they don't know where to start. Part of the problem is they pick something dense, slow, or overly academic to start, something they were told is an essential, a classic, and yet after 30 pages, they want to give up. And then we hear studies about how 25–30% of adults don't read a single book in a given year, and we panic. But the truth is, becoming a reader usually starts with the right book at the right time. If I had to start my reading life over from zero, here are the five books I would begin with. And these are books that are immersive and emotional, books that are almost impossible to put down. Not necessarily books that would be considered, the most academic, the most classical, but books that will get you into reading, books that will help you fall in love with reading as a way of life. And if you read even one of these, there's a good chance that you'll want to read 100 more. So here are the five books that I'd start with if I wanted to get into reading. The first book is a classic. This book got hundreds of millions of people into reading. It is a book that is everyone knows it, everyone's heard about, and yet it's worth reading 100%. This is a book that has gotten a whole generation to fall in love with literature again. And for that reason, I am deeply grateful for Harry Potter. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, as it was published in the United States, but it will always be Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, is a story about a young boy who, living an ordinary life, finds out that he is a wizard, goes to this boarding school, and the adventures begin. And really, Harry Potter, although this can be read alone as a standalone, it's a whole series of seven books that are all fantastic, all deeply immersive, and really bring you into this whole other world. It's a classic fantasy adventure novel set in our world, though, a world like ours, but just a little bit different. And then that's a classic of British literature, British children's literature in the 20th century and also in the 19th century, down the rabbit hole from Alice in Wonderland as well. Same kind of idea through the wardrobe and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But Harry Potter is a great place to start for a lot of people. Even though I do have to apologize to Harold Bloom, who is one of my favorite literary critics of all time. He famously said that Harry Potter, if you start with that, that will lead you to read Stephen King, and he was not particularly in favor of Stephen King. Let's put it that way. He saw him as uh, not a classic writer, separating the classics from the hacks. But I don't see things that way. I think that getting into writing is a different process than classical reading, you know? So if we're getting into great works of literature, we have to start with the books that are exciting and adventurous, the books that stay with you. You know, I've read Harry Potter and I've read it in other languages to help me learn languages, which is another thing that I think can be very useful when you learn through books that you love, that you enjoy, that are easy to read, that you know the stories well. You can then start using these as tools to do all sorts of things like learning other languages, teaching your kids, to read and to enjoy great literature. So starting with a work like Harry Potter is absolutely a great idea if I was starting from zero and trying to get back into reading, learn how to read. The second book here is another classic adventure novel. Now, it's a little bit different, it's a little bit older. It's, it's really one of the greatest adventure stories ever written. And it is the precursor to perhaps the greatest fantasy adventure story, the most famous story that basically invented the genre of fantasy. And this is, of course, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, The Hobbit is, a story of a hobbit who goes on an adventure, and there's dwarves and dragons and elves and trolls and all sorts of crazy things that happen on this adventure. But The Hobbit is really more than that. It's one of the great works of children literature. Tolkien famously wrote it for his children as just a story that he was telling them that then unfolded and became The Hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings, one of the great, most profound moral cores of any story ever written. That one I would, I'll fight and make that argument that Lord of the Rings is absolutely a true classic in the same way that we can put up Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. It deserves to be read in the same sphere. But The Hobbit is really, it's a little bit easier to read. It's not that Lord of the Rings is so hard, but The Hobbit is a really easy way to get into reading. It's fun, it's exciting. It's a kind of novel that you'll read and it'll get you wanting to read more. Even if you've never seen yourself as a reader, even if you've never thought of yourself as somebody who loves great works of literature, just knowing that The Hobbit is written by the same guy who basically invented a genre, and that it is, it was written in like the 30s, right? This is an old book, and yet it feels so contemporary and so modern. So The Hobbit is another one, absolute classic, another one that has sold over 100 million copies. So this got a different generation into reading, but it's one that you can use to educate, children. It's one that you can get yourself back into reading, or start your love of reading through reading The Hobbit. If Harry Potter is not your cup of tea for whatever reason, I would highly recommend The Hobbit. That might be where I start, honestly, if I was going from the beginning. But The Hobbit is a fantastic work to start if you're trying to get into reading. Now, third, this book's different than the first two. It's not so much an adventure novel, it's a deeply emotional and human story. It takes place in a different time. It takes place in Germany, in Nazi Germany during the Second World War. And this book follows a young girl as she discovers the power of books in the midst of this horrible, dark, dangerous time. And this book is, of course, The Book Thief. Now, The Book Thief is really a book about books. It's a book about the love of books and how literature, great literature, and not even classic, just great in any way you want to use that term, works that are meaningful. Maybe that's the best definition for great literature, can help people through dark times, through times of unbelievable pain and hardship and chaos. And another thing about The Book Thief that is really cool, from a writing perspective, when I started writing and I read The Book Thief, it totally changed my perspective. I was very young at the time about what a narrator could look like, because there's a very unique approach that the author takes in The Book Thief about how to narrate the book. So typically, obviously, a narrator could be first or third person. It's going to be a person. But in this case, it's a different entity who narrates the story. And so I don't want to spoil anything, but really worth reading, really cool, really unique, and very readable. This is an eminently readable book. So were the first two, but this one in particular, if you're just looking for something that's got a great story, it's got a great moral core, it's going to move you emotionally, something that you're going to be attached to on that level. Just this kind of beautiful writing. Uh, this book reminds you that stories can really help people survive in the hardest of moments. And this is a great book to start if you want to get back into reading, if you want to start your love of reading, The Book Thief. All right, now a fourth one here, and this is a classic too. This is a simple story and a short story filled with powerful ideas. A story that is often touted as one of the great adventure novels, the great novels to introduce people into that thinking about your life, thinking about your choices, about your ambitions, about what you're working towards and driving towards. It's a novel that, has been denigrated for sure by people who see it as not so much a work of serious literature, but it's sold a lot. A lot of people love this book. A lot of people have been moved and touched by this book, and that's really what we're talking about today. Books that move and touch and get people in love with reading. And this book has done exactly that. This book is a fantastic testament to the power of great ideas, great stories to change people's lives. So many people have been changed by this book, and this book is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Now, The Alchemist, again, it's a short, simple book, and it's filled with great meaning, great ideas. But I wouldn't necessarily say that this book is a deep classic that you would want to. How should I put this? Not necessarily the book that I would reread many, many times, although a lot of people feel that way. It is a book that I think if I was getting into reading would absolutely blow my mind and show me what reading is capable of. So I think this is a great book to start with. And for some people, this does end up being a book they want to read and reread. For me, this was a book that was very important at a period in my life, at a time in my life that got me into reading more seriously again, maybe at a period of lack. And I think it can do that for you as well. Another cool thing, the story, it follows a young shepherd. His name's Santiago. He's going on this journey for this mysterious treasure, but it's his journey that matters, right? And against the classic, it's kind of a cliche, right? But it's the destiny, the courage, the journey is The skills that are developed on the journey are the things that matter more than the actual destination. And this book is a great insight into finding calling in your life. It's a book that can also be read from that perspective, not just literary, but also from a perspective of self-improvement. Um, and it really makes you reflect on your journey, where you are, where you'd like to be, and what is required in order to get you there. So, The Alchemist is another absolutely fantastic book to start with, um, if you wanted to become a reader. And the final book here, this book is one that's very personal to me. I've read this book many times. I've worked through this book. I listened to it audio. I've read it physical. I've read it on Kindle. Reading it physically, I think, is the way to go. Although it's narrated very well, and the Audible version is very good too. We can talk another time about the differences between audio versus visual reading. That's another thing I will say to getting into reading. That's not really the purpose of this whole exploration. But do any of these books however you want. Audio, visual, Kindle, read the book, get into reading. And then we can talk about the best ways for your mind to learn, for your mind to grow. But whatever you need to do, whatever you feel you can do, if you can read it physically, read it physically. If you wanted to listen to it, listen to it. This last book here, super impactful for me. Great story, written by a writer who has a whole slew of books that could be included on this list as essential readings and books that you can use to start your journey into literature. He's great at writing gripping, thrilling, emotionally involved, easy to read books that'll get you in love with reading. This is, of course, The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Now, The Graveyard Book, it's such a cool premise. Basically, the idea of it is this little kid grows up as an orphan, and he is raised in a graveyard by ghosts. And that's all I'll say about the premise of the novel. Hopefully, that will inspire you to read it. It's really interesting, really cool to see what happens. Um, in the story, the character's name is Nobody Owens, which is pretty funny, I think, as well. But the Graveyard Book, Neil Gaiman in general, he is a great writer because he's deeply influenced by a lot of other, you know, classic writers, right? His work, he's explicitly referenced, Mary Shelley, Rudyard Kipling, Edgar Allan Poe, um, Alan Moore, Ursula K. Le Guin. I know he's deeply influenced by kind of some of the more like Tolkien for sure, and Lewis and Chesterton and some of these older writers as well. Um, but he's a writer that is has read the classics. He's a classic writer, and yet he's a modern fantasy popular book writer, who really knows both sides. And so you get a little bit of insight. Tolkien is influenced a lot by classic writers, very academic his influences, which is why I didn't really reference them in this video here today. But the influences of Gaiman, I think, kind of show that Harold Bloom's original idea that you need to read classics that will then make you read more classic novels is not the only way to get into great literature. You can start by reading a writer like Neil Gaiman and an easy to read book like The Graveyard Book, which is more like a chill, almost a tween book of his books. He has older ones that are more designated for adults. And then you go from there and you develop and you read some of the books that influenced him. Maybe you read Frankenstein and then you develop more. And maybe you read some of the things that were contemporary. You read Percy Shelley's poetry and you fall in love with that. And then maybe you read Shakespeare, right? I mean, it doesn't have to start with Shakespeare. It doesn't have to start with Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. These are great writers as well, but The Graveyard Book is a fantastic place to start if you want to get into reading. So, those are the 5 books that I would start with. If I wanted to become a reader and I was starting from zero, it didn't matter what I was going to read. I just want to make sure that I'm going to read a books and I'm going to get excited and I'm going to go deep and I'm not going to get lost in, start a book, get 20 pages in. Man, Ulysses is pretty dense. I don't really enjoy this. We don't want that, right? We don't want that to be your experience with literature. I want your experience with literature to be that you love it, right? And I want you to start with something that is exciting, something that you love that is going to get you in love with literature. You start with one book and you read 100 more. So those are the 5 books that I would start with. Harry Potter, The Hobbit, The Book Thief, The Alchemist, and The Graveyard Book. Now, each one of these books does something special. One pulls you into an unforgettable world, another takes you back in time, or back on a there and back again adventure, in a different time, in a different world. One of them breaks your heart, and it teaches you the depth of the human soul, how that can be affected by books. One of them makes you think about your dreams and your passions, the direction of your life, and what you want to do. And the last one reminds you of how powerful imagination can be, which is so important for any reader. Now, all of these can be deeply, deeply transformative, but I'm curious, if you had to recommend one book that makes people fall in love with reading, what would it be? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your picks. And if you enjoy talking about books and the ideas inside of them, consider subscribing. There's a lot more stories worth exploring. Okay. God bless.